Hey everybody, Cole here with Classic Mini DIY. Today I want to talk to you guys about your cooling system. Now, most conventional cooling systems run on some mixture of water and antifreeze or coolant. And those combined fluids give you varying degrees of cooling potential in your car. And whether it's a classic Mini Cooper or a brand new Volkswagen or a Toyota or whatever, they all use the same basic principle of using a combination of water and coolant to provide your car the best cooling potential and keeping it cool while you're driving down the road. Now, something that I've been wanting to try on my Mini for quite some time is something called waterless coolant. And the concept behind waterless coolant is that you remove the H2O out of the system and you replace it with a synthetic fluid that provides you a higher level of corrosion protection and temperature protection. Now, if you're a scientist watching this channel, you're probably thinking, well, wait a minute, water has the highest heat transfer of any fluid, and if you exchanged water for something else, a synthetic fluid, wouldn't that reduce the cooling potential? And the answer to that question is yes and no. So where waterless coolant really shines out above water is the maximum and minimum temperatures that it can operate at. So where water starts to boil over and starts to vapor at about 220 to 230 degrees Fahrenheit, the waterless coolant will go all the way up to 375 degrees Fahrenheit and all the way down to -40. So it gives a superior level of cooling potential past the boil over state of water. And then in addition to that, it provides an enhanced level of corrosion protection because there is no H2O to oxidize the metal inside your engine block. So as you can see behind me, Evans Waterless Coolant was kind enough to provide me the products for this video and allow me to put it in my Mini to test it out and provide a review to you guys. And in this video, I'm going to cover the whole process of converting your Mini to waterless cooling, as well as some of the special considerations that you have to take into account once you've converted and while you're converting to a waterless cooling system. Now, to get started, let's go over some of the stuff that you're going to need in order to accomplish this job. And then I'll go into the process of how to actually get the water out of your system and then replace it with this waterless coolant. So I've got a few things out here. Some of this stuff is from Evans, and then some of it is just tools that you're going to need for this job. First off, you're going to need prep fluid, and that's sold by Evans. And this is for extracting the water out of your engine block, which I'll go into a little bit more detail in a little bit. You're going to need some gasket maker. You're going to need an actual gasket for your thermostat housing. You may also need a thermostat if you want to change the temperature at which your thermostat opens and allows coolant to pass. I do this every winter and summer just because my motor can be a little bit finicky. I like to alter when the coolant starts passing through the motor and begins cooling in the winter, and then in the summer I want it to open sooner. Then in addition to that, we've got a little funnel that comes with most of the Evans products when you purchase them on Amazon or on their website. And then something that Evans provided me that's not explicitly required, but is something that's nice to have when you're doing a conversion like this. This is called a refractometer. And what this does is it allows you to measure the water content of the coolant after you've extracted all of the H2O and then replaced it with the waterless coolant. Because part of the conversion to waterless, the goal is to remove as much of, if not 100% of the water from your coolant system. So this is a nice to have. If you don't want to purchase a refractometer, you can use test strips to determine the water content. And Evans will do a free sample for you guys if you purchase their product and then send them a sample of your coolant after you've completed the whole process. And then finally, the last thing obviously is the high performance waterless coolant. Now, this is the American version. Obviously, I'm American. I live in North Carolina. So this is what it's going to look like if you're purchasing it here in North America. If you're purchasing it overseas in Europe, this is going to look a little bit different. And I'm going to provide you links down in the description. It's the same product. It's just sold by a different reseller in the UK and Europe. So if you're interested in doing this, check out those links below and then just follow the link that corresponds to your locale. And then a few additional things that you're going to need is a catch can, because you're going to be draining the fluid out of your system. So you're going to need a way to catch that fluid so it doesn't just drain onto the ground. And then I'd also recommend a floor jack and jack stands. It's going to make getting underneath your car and draining the system much easier. So let's start off by getting the system drained. So let's head out to the car and get all that coolant that's in the car now out and into the catch can. Okay, to start off, in my opinion, the first thing that's worth doing is taking off your grille. And if you have big headlights in the front, you need to take those off too. And this will give you access to the space behind here so you can get to the drain plug on your radiator If you don't have a drain plug on your radiator, that's okay. It just means that you're going to have to disconnect the hose that's on the back of the radiator, and I'll show you guys where that's located. Luckily, I've got a drain plug on my new radiator, so I don't have to do that. All right, great, so that's off. Now, as you can see, I've got an auxiliary radiator here installed. I am going to take that off while we're doing this job because it's starting to get cold here and I don't need that extra cooling anymore. So let's jump up to the top side of the car and I'll show you guys what's next. All right, so now we're looking at the top of the motor here. And there's a few different things that I want to point out before we get started. Right here is your radiator cap, which I've already taken off of mine. But I want to make sure you guys know not to open that while the car is hot. That's a pressurized system. It'll blow hot water at you and you can get really, really burned. So always do coolant jobs when the car is cold, or if you're a professional and you know how to handle a pressurized cap. So with the car cold, there's nothing to worry about. I'll go ahead and open that up. And then I'm going to go over the coolant system here so you just have an idea of what we're working with. So you have your radiator here. You have your hose here that connects to your thermostat housing. And your thermostat sits right in here. This is where we're going to need that gasket later because we're going to be removing this cap and we're going to have to put a new gasket on later. And then in addition to that, this hose right here on my car is going to an auxiliary radiator that sits in the front grille. Most cars will run this back into the passenger compartment, and this is going to be attached to your heater system with the other end of the heater system attached to this hose here. And this is where the coolant comes out of your motor and goes into your heater, which provides heat to your car, and then back out and then back into the hose that's in the back of your radiator. And then finally, there's two different ways to drain this system. In this scenario, I'm going to be using the drain plug that's in the front of my radiator. So if you follow the front of the radiator down, there's a small plug at the base of the radiator. If you don't have one of those plugs, then you're going to have to follow the hose in the back of the radiator down here. Take a long flathead screwdriver, get down in there, loosen the hose clamp, and disconnect that. It's going to be kind of a challenging job. It's not especially fun, but hopefully you only have to do this a few times. So this is also going to be a really great time to take a look at your coolant when you drain it and make sure that your coolant has no oil in it, so it's not a milky color. It should just be a green, a dark green, clear is okay. And then if you haven't replaced the coolant in your car ever, and no one else has, it might be kind of chunky. So this is a good time to clear out that coolant system, even if you're not putting waterless coolant in, and taking a coolant health check. So let's move into draining the system. Now you don't have to worry too much about the coolant getting all over everything. It is just a mixture of water and coolant. It's not super corrosive or anything like that. So you can clean that up once we're all done with this project. Next, we're going to start taking apart the thermostat housing and taking this hose off the top here so we can get into the thermostat, and then we can blow out the system and get all the water out of it. So let's take this apart. All right, so once you have that thermostat housing off and you pull the thermostat out as well as the gasket, this is going to give you the opportunity to look down inside the head and kind of see what the state of things are. In mine, I've got a good bit of corrosion, you can see there, and that's kind of what this waterless coolant is going to help prevent. And now, the next thing that we're going to do is take a shop vac. We're just going to blow this out here. So we're going to try and get as much of the water out of the system as we can. While we're doing that, we're going to kind of cycle between plugging this hole, and just blowing all the different places out. Try and get it as dry as possible. It doesn't have to be 100% perfect. We are going to be using that prep fluid, which is what is going to pull all the kind of nooks and crannies water out of the system. In addition, if you do have a heater hooked up, you're going to want to drain the heater too, because if you don't, you're going to have a whole bunch of coolant and water in there, and that's going to compromise the ability of the water cooling system to work to full potential. So I'm going to go ahead and disconnect this hose here and get my auxiliary radiator out, as well as disconnect the hose on the left side of my head here so that I can get in and blow air through that hole as well. Okie doke, so I've got my auxiliary radiator removed. The next thing I want to do is start blowing out the system and trying to get as much of the water as I can out. Now, the way I'm doing that is I'm using a shop vac with the hose attached to the blowing end of the shop vac. Most newer shop vacs have this capability, so if you do have one, just check if you can move the hose to the end that blows the air out. If you can't, you can use compressed air if you've got an air system, but I strongly recommend going through and trying to get as much air as you can out. Now while I'm doing this, I'm going to cover different holes to kind of add different pressure to the system, but the majority of the water I'm expecting to come out of the front drain plug. So you kind of want to make sure that your car's tilted in a way that's going to facilitate the most water coming out of that hole. So my front drain plug is on the front of the car, obviously, on the front of the radiator. So I want to make sure that the lowest point is that drain plug. So let's get started. All right, so now we've done our first drain of the system and we've got it blown out as best we can. You don't have to get 100% of the water out at this stage. That is what this prep fluid is going to help us do. So the next step is we're going to run this prep fluid through the system. Now you can do that a few different ways. You can pour it in and reassemble everything and run the car. You don't need to get it up to full operating temperature or anything like that, but we do want to give the motor an opportunity to cycle everything through every nook and cranny that it can. This is a fluid that's called hydroscopic, and what that does is it actually grabs the water that's in all those little corners. So let's head out to the car. We'll close up all the holes. I'm not going to put the thermostat in, and I'm only going to put that thermostat housing on there tightly with the old gasket for now, just so I can get the fluid flowing through the system, get it to all the corners, and then once we turn the motor off, we'll have a little bit easier time disassembling it again to do the same step we just did with the blowing out and getting rid of all of the prep fluid that now has bonded with the water. So let's head back out there. And now it's time to run the car for a little bit so that we can start moving all that prep fluid through the system. Now, before we get out there and start the motor, just double check all the fittings, make sure everything's tight, make sure everything's sealed, and then we can get that prep fluid running through. All right, great. So we've run the motor, and I ran it for about five minutes or so. Let the water run through all the different channels. This hose, run through the pipe, the radiator, the head, all the engine block, and then after we're done, we're just going to take all this apart and literally repeat the process of what we did before, where we drain the system and then we can add our coolant. All right, great. So that's pretty much it for the preparation stage of putting waterless coolant in. The next step is to reassemble this stuff and add your actual coolant in. One thing that I'm going to do on mine is get all this stuff really nice and dry, and then I'm going to come in and I'm going to put the fluid into the cylinder head here and then button all that up and then fill this up with the remainder of the fluid so that the whole system's primed and ready to roll. In addition to that, prior to doing this, just like the prep fluid, you're going to want to reconnect the hose in the back or put your drain plug back in the front of your radiator. That way you don't lose all the coolant. After that, I'm going to give you guys kind of a rundown on how to care for your car once you've got waterless coolant in it, as well as any kind of regular FAQ questions that might pop up that a lot of people might have about waterless cooling. All right, so the next thing we're going to do is put the thermostat in and then add our new gasket. These gaskets can be picked up at 7 Mini Parts. I've got a link to that in the description below. So thermostat in, like so, and then slide that gasket over. Great, so now all we got to do is put that thermostat housing back on and seal everything up there. All right, great. So now the next step is to just run the system. You check to make sure everything's tight, everything's on. Let's run it up and see what happens. All right, great. So that really is the majority of the process. The only thing left to do is to test the water content. Now, what I'm using to do that is called a refractometer. Evans does sell these, but if you don't feel like getting one of these tools, you can also use test strips that will test the water content in your system, or you can send a water sample to Evans and they'll test it for you for free with the purchase of their coolant. So I'm going to run back out there, grab a little bit of water. I'm going to place it in this refractometer and determine exactly how much water I have in my system. And we put the sample directly on the end here. And it looks like I am right at 55, just a hair above 55 on the brick scale, which means I'm underneath that 3% water content, which is great. That's the goal. The main aim is to get below 3% water, and what that does is it offers the most benefit for using this waterless coolant. Now, as we're finishing up, I want to go over some kind of common questions people have about waterless coolant systems, specifically the repercussions of living with a waterless cooling system. So the first thing most people ask is that now that my whole cooling system is waterless, can I not put any water in it at all? What if I get a leak out in the road, and what if I lose all of my coolant for some reason and I have to put new coolant in? It's totally okay to add water to a waterless cooling system. The consequence is you'll end up with a less and less effective waterless cooling system. So the higher the percentage of water, the less benefit and the lower the temperature the boil over starts to reach. So, with less than 3%, you're looking at 375 degrees Fahrenheit. And then as you get up in higher percentages, that 375 comes down pretty quickly as you start to move over into 4, 5, 6, 7% water. So what that means for you as the owner of the car and the one who's operating it is that when you're out and about, I would just keep a small container of that waterless coolant if you think that you're at risk of springing a leak. I mean, most of the time you're gonna be okay. I don't carry coolant around with me everywhere I go. And at this point, I'm probably not gonna carry around waterless coolant everywhere I go. If I start to have a problem, I can add a little bit of water. The only drawback is that if you start to lose that cooling potential, you're gonna end up having to run through this prep fluid and go through and pull all the water out of that system again. That said, the process is not going to be as difficult as it was before because you didn't have a high level of water in your system at the point that you added a little bit more back into it. Now, another question that people have is, well, what if I want to move back to a watered cool system? You can do that. In fact, you don't even have to take this fluid out. You can add water back in as you start to operate, and it'll just slowly dilute itself back down into a watered cooling system. So there's no situation where you're going to be like trapped into having a waterless cooling system or a watered cooling system. You can always switch between the two, although there is no real benefit to having a hybrid system. So after completing this job, your car is probably going to be really messy. The only other thing that I would recommend doing is taking your car to a car wash or bringing it out into your yard, getting a nice wash done, get all that kind of coolant that's all over the car off, and then also properly dispose of the coolant. Now, I want to give a big thank you to Evans Waterless Coolant. I really appreciate them sending me these products out. Hopefully this will inspire you guys to try this out on your Mini, give it a go, see what it's like, see if you like it. I'm going to be using this for the foreseeable future, and I'll provide a review and an update probably in the next month or so after running this in my car to let you guys know how I'm liking it, how it's performing, and if I am going to maintain the waterless cooling system or switch back. So with the job done, let's move into the customer car showcase brought to you by Total Car Reviews. If you haven't seen his channel, check it out. It's really cool. He's doing lots of Mini work. He's restoring a red classic Mini from the ground up. He's about 20-30% of the way done. So there's a lot of content upcoming, of that whole restore process that he's going through. And there's a link that popped up over here for his channel. But let's move into the customer showcase. I've got a really cool submission from one of my viewers. This is Austin's car. It's a 1974 1275 GT Clubman. This thing is awesome looking. That paint job is really, really cool. It's got a single 1.5 SU carburetor, oil cooler, auxiliary radiator. There's a 6-point bolt-in roll cage, plexiglass windows. This thing's awesome. Looks like he uses it to autocross, and it looks like he wants to try and rewire the whole car with modern fuses and maybe paint it, although I really, really like this paint job, Austin. I don't know if you should repaint this. Thanks so much for submitting this image. If you guys want to be part of the customer showcase, send me an email at classicminidiy@gmail.com, and then I'll go through those submissions and add them to the end of my episodes. And thanks again, Austin, for your submission.